Hello and welcome! It is Vintage Super League time once again. I'm Randy Bueller. I'm joined for the pregame show by Steven Menendian. How you doing, Steve?
I'm going great. It's great to be here. How are you, Randy?
I'm
Did you
good.
get
I'm
did you get some
I'm
rest?
a bit, yeah. I slept a lot last night and then woke up and then slept some more. So
That
I
sounds about right.
survived my 39-hour long Monday, and yeah, I should be good. I should be good to go. But yeah,
Well,
I
good.
know I probably won't be the only one who looks a little jet lagged. Obviously, anybody who was at the Pro Tour in Sydney last weekend, basically we all came home yesterday, and here we are.
Well, you guys are road warriors, and I'm impressed that everyone can come here after such a long weekend and long not just the weekend, but the prep that everyone put in. I'm sure is just an incredible amount of work. So, but I'm excited to be here and talking about our favorite subject in Magic, right, Randy?
Vintage.
Vintage.
Absolutely. I got to get back in the vintage mindset. I did look at Kai's deck list, so I know kind of mostly what I'm up against. You've probably spent a lot more time looking at yours, or are you just like
Well,
I'm looking toward the play-in tournament for next season.
yeah. Yeah, this season has been really interesting, and the arc of the season from the preseason on has been, I think, really fun to watch. We began this season with one of the most interesting events in the history of the format, which was the restriction
Huh.
of Lodestone Golem, right?
Yeah, sure.
Following the restriction of Chalice of the Void. So the format is kind of in a sense in new territory, right? Um, we are in we are in new territory. We are in uncharted waters where um, we've got a format that is, where workshops have been sort of so prevalent and so powerful, and now, a series of restrictions have done things to them. So there's a lot of questions as to what happens next, and we've been observing what's happened next and over the course of this season. Although it's kind of interesting how vintage seems to process itself on three speeds. There's the paper speed, which is its
Okay.
own, kind of people show up every couple months and play in their local tournament, or they go to the big tournaments like the Vintage Championship or the NYSE or the upcoming Waterbury or the Bazaar Moxon. Then there's Magic Online, the folks like Ryan Eberhardt at Diaphen Online who play in all the dailies and all the premier events. And then there's the VSL, which is kind of like just a notch faster in terms of format progression. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the any of these versions of vintage predict the other, but they're all happening, it's slightly different. It's slightly different levels of acceleration.
Sure.
And what's interesting just to think about, how much ground we've covered on Magic Online in this season, but how much has happened really in the format. I mean, we saw humans win the Bazaar Moxon, we
Yes, we
s-
did.
which was astounding, something we'd never.
Agreed.
Then we saw workshops, Montolio just crush the Magic Online Power 9 event and then do the same thing at the NYSE.
True.
And now we've seen the last couple months Ryan Eberhardt just crushing it in the Power 9 event with a Grixis Pyromancer deck. So we've seen a lot of things happening in Vintage in the last couple months. And I think we're still, to some extent, figuring things out. I mean, it's
So,
only been 3 months, right? It's only been 3 months.
yeah, and I'm going to insert one quick teaser before you keep going, by the way. Ryan Eberhardt, the guy you've talked about, Diafano Magic Online, he's been crushing. He's he won two Power Nines in a row?
Yes,
Is that
yeah,
true?
yes.
He's going to be substituting for Brian Kelly this week. So we're actually going to see Ryan. He's going to be playing in our first match, playing the role of Brian Kelly against Rich Shea, and that means we're going to get him in the booth for round two commentary as well. So yeah, it's pretty exciting actually to get a guy who's been absolutely killing it on Magic Online to kind of sit in for a week here and get to hear his take on things.
And not only that, Ryan has top aided both of the last two Vintage Championships. And I probably should have given him credit for this a long time ago, but he's been one of my key playtest partners for a lot of the last few seasons. So he's been certainly been a huge help to me. So I'm excited to see him play. He's an amazing player here.
Yeah.
But it's interesting also that the what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, especially in the VSL, is there's been a crush of Gush decks.
Yeah,
So
it's
one
back
of
to
the
the Gush
questions
decks for sure.
so one of the questions is going to be, how do you attack the Gush decks? And I think that's one of the things that we should spend a second on. Um, One of the things that we discovered was the rise of the White Eldrazi and the Eldrazi decks
Right.
attack Gush in a very particular way, and we saw Paul Rietzel's White Weenie deck with some of those key tactics. I think that I'd like to hear your perspective, but I think there's three ways to attack Gush in Vintage right now.
Okay.
The first is sphere effects, which just
Sure.
jam up all the mana and the efficient cantrips, which is usually traditionally in the workshop effects, but Thalia based decks do that as
Yeah,
well.
that's basically what the white Eldrazi deck is trying to do. It's what all the Eldrazi decks are trying to do. They're functioning like workshop decks, even if they don't have the card workshop.
Right. And they're filling some of that space, and they've got
Mm-hmm.
a, new printings, which we'll talk about in a second. The second way to attack it, I think, is Cavern of Souls, because Cavern of Souls feud human strategies in some of these other threats, like Spirit of the Labyrinth. They can be really difficult for Gush decks to deal with. There's a bunch of them. There's Gadok
Interesting.
Teague.
Yeah,
Gadok Teague.
Spirit of the Labyrinth is spectacular. I mean, I had that in the white Eldrazi list I was playing, and I kept wanting to play more and more and more of them. It's just it's not actually a human.
Right.
Stupid card's a spirit, so it's even that much harder with your cavern is where your white man is coming from. But you're right, great card against the Gush strategies for sure.
And it's not just the Spirit of the Labyrinth. It's a whole bunch of those cards that attack the Gush decks, like the card that prevents you from playing multiple spells per turn can be difficult to deal with when you're trying to
Yep.
combo cantrips. Like to play Gush and then Gush into something else is really difficult when
Yep.
there is a canonist in play.
Yep.
And there are a number of them. And Cavern of Souls just obviates all of the hate that the Gush deck has in terms of
Sure.
the counter magic. You have to be sitting there with cards like Bolt or Murderous Cut or any of those. And Gadok Teague, which we really haven't seen a lot about, can be a really threatening card against Gush. It stops Gush. It stops both the Delve spells. It stops Force of Will.
Okay.
It stops Murderous Cut. It stops anyway. It's pretty effective.
All
And
right.
the third,
So your first way to attack the Gush decks you think is Thorn slash Sphere effects. Second way is Hate Bears essentially. What's your third way?
I think that Defense Grid still remains a very viable way to attack Gush decks, because the Gush decks just don't have as expansive a mana base as the big blue decks that we have seen in vintage history.
Yep.
And Defense Grid, I think, is just an apex threat, and then Defense Grid can set up against the Gush decks. I mean, we have seen people fight around it, but when you play Defense Grid, if you can resolve it, first of all, it gets around Flusterstorm, Mental Misstep, Spell
But
Pierce.
don't you basically mean Defense Grid in a combo deck?
Yeah,
Like if
well,
you're not
it
killing them
doesn't,
on the spot, they're just going to beat you up with Mentor anyway.
which is interesting. So combo decks, yes, but think about the full range. So I don't just mean Storm combo. Like you could put it in cards like in decks like 2-card Monty, or strategies like that, where
Sure.
you are trying to set up a combo in between the time that the Gush deck is setting up its draw engine and then needs to execute its win. Even if you can resolve a Defense Grid and your opponent has mana, at some point they have to play a threat. They have to play a Mentor, or they have to play a Pyromancer, and that gives you a window of opportunity. So I do think Defense Grid still acts as a way to attack Gush decks. The fourth way that used to be effective was Oath of Druids, but the white creatures that have been printed, like Containment Priest, no longer really make that as effective. Let's not forget, Randy, and I think it's easy to forget this, but Oath of Druids won the last 2 vintage championships.
It is easy to forget.
You're
right.
in seas of Gush decks and seas of workshop decks. So
yeah, it's pretty good against. I mean, it was Delver strategies back in the day, a couple years ago, that were at the forefront. The card Delver is terrible against Oath. Even a Pyromancer, it's hard to race an Oath with a Pyromancer. Mentor starts to go wide enough, fast enough that sometimes you can. It kind of depends how fast the finish on the Oath deck is, but it's a good point. And then I know that the secret fourth, or maybe it's fifth way to attack the Gush decks is the one you don't want to talk about, right? Which is campaigning for WotC to restrict something.
Well, that's inevitable. That's going to come up. I think. So the next ban and restricted list announcement is the end of September, which would be right before the vintage.
Yeah, I think they'd be crazy to do something right before Eternal Weekend. I think that let's get to the other side of Eternal Weekend and then have this conversation. I'll agree to not talk about it until then.
I agree with you. I mean, I also, there are other things that go into the matrix of decision making. One of it is gameplay. I think Gush creates a very fair and frankly interesting set of gameplay, right? Where you actually get to interact.
Whole book on it.
I may have done that and reissued that book recently.
Yeah, saw that. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
I mean, I agree with you as long as it's not 40% of the metagame.
Yeah, if it
10,
reaches
20% of the metagame, that's great to have around. It's super interesting, but anything at 40% is just, I know, it becomes annoying.
Well, I just want to clarify when we say the metagame, I don't just mean like what people are showing up in the MTGO queues. I mean, if it's like 40% of top 8s consistently, like if the vintage championship top 8 is half Gush and Gush is the winning deck, it's probably going to go, right? But
Sure.
if there's like 2 or 3 Gush decks in the Vintage Championship top 8 and 2 or 3 in the next upcoming events, I don't consider that dominant. I mean, that just doesn't
Yeah.
reach the levels of oppression that we've seen in other formats, especially given all the other factors.
Yeah,
But
I mean, from my mind, we started out in a world where people, after the lodestone restriction, it went from, oh God, everyone's afraid of Gush, to like, oh, people could attack Gush from this angle, and it kind of worked for a while. And then people attacked Gush from this angle, and it kind of worked for a while. Now the Gush decks might actually be the best deck, so we got to see if the metagame, I mean, you got to give the metagame time, especially in Vintage,
definitely.
which, like you say, moves at a couple different speeds in a couple of different places. But
And there are players who come to those events like and they work all year. They work for months on their
mhm.
solution. They don't show up in those events until you get there. So I
Well,
think
we'll
we got
see
to
what happens.
definitely.
All right, I do want to look at the schedule for tonight. I mean, you've talked a lot about Gush, and that does set a little bit of the table for the decks that people are playing. As you recall, these decks were submitted. It's about a month ago now. Everyone's been playing the same decks for weeks 7, 8, and 9. We are in the last week of the regular season, so this is week 9. Hopefully, we can get the schedule up on the screen. We can walk you through what's going to be going on. But we've actually got 6 matches tonight because we had technical difficulties. Paul Rietzel and Rich Shea were unable to play their week 8 match. We've just rolled that into the schedule. That means these are the last 6 matches of the regular season. By the time we get to the end there, we're going to know who tied for a playoff spot. We do not have the normal drama about who is going to finish last. Unfortunately, that is Steven Menendian.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had some horrible luck. I don't think anyone should see this as any kind of slight on your ability to play Vintage, obviously. But it's a tough field, and I was right there with you sweating it until last week. So Steve will be last. That means there's only one spot to play in next year. I mean, maybe somebody decides to take a season off. We'll sort out the next season play-in tournament later. But I'm sure you'll be trying to win your way back in. Meanwhile, we got some playoffs to figure out. So the top 4 make the playoffs, and it's not just top 4 make the playoffs. The seeding matters a ton. The number 1 seed gets a bye all the way into the finals. Our playoffs start by having 3rd place play against 4th. The winner of that plays against the 2nd place from the regular season. The winner of that plays against the number 1 seed. So seeding matters, top 4 matters, and crucially, our tiebreaker is tiebreaker matches. We just play more Magic. Any tie that we need to break for any playoff spot that matters, we're going to play more Magic. Now, we're not, and all that Magic, those tiebreaker matches, if there are any, those are going to be next week. So we already had a 6-match show. We're not going to try to add any tiebreaker matches to the end of this week's show. But who knows what the ties are going to be? Because if you look at these records, they're kind of crunched in the middle. If you want to, go to the website, vintagesuperleague.com. I wrote up all the playoff scenarios. We can have a 4-way tie for the 4 playoff spots at 6 and 3, meaning that 5 and 4 players miss the playoffs. We can also have a 6-way tie at 4 and 5 for 4th place through 9th, meaning everyone except Steve kind of sort of makes the playoffs, or at least gets into that tiebreaker match. That's the one I'm rooting for, of course, because that means I'm still alive. All I need to do is I have to beat Kai, and then I need the other 4 matches to go exactly the right way, and then I'm in. No problem.
If we get crazy tiebreaker 9-way or whatever 6-way tie off, how are we going to do that in terms of the schedule? How will
We
that be handled?
probably will just have next week will be all tiebreaker matches if we have enough matches. We probably won't be able to have the first real playoff match for another week, is my guess. I mean, I'm going to see how it works out, because we can also have a 6-way tie for 2nd at 5 and 4, like 2nd through whatever that is, 7th, I think, and then anywhere in between. So there's a ton of scenarios where people can get crazy tiebreaker scenarios. If you get to 6 wins, you're definitely locked. If you get to 5 wins, it would take up. There's one scenario where people can miss at 5 wins, but not even get a tiebreaker match. But like I said, go to the website if you want to read the scenarios, and I'm sure we'll be walking them through as they start to take shape as we go through the matches.
Let's take a look at the other end of the bracket, though. So if Shuhei wins, he's locked up the 1st seed.
Right? He can be tied by Rich, because Rich has 2 matches to play. Rich can still get to 7 and 2 as well. Yeah, Shuhei 7 and 2 would be only Rich and Shuhei can get to 7 and 2.
So it's possible that we can lock up the 1st seed, and as you said, it's such a huge advantage because you skip the fray.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing where if we've got a 2-way tie for the 1st seed, well, whatever, we just add that to next week's show, right? So we don't have to resolve it before the week after. Should be a fun night. Like I said, so many scenarios starting to take shape. So a crazy multiple six-way tie scenarios for people to root for. Your match turns out to be the only one that doesn't matter for my six-way tie scenario, my 4 and 5 tie scenario, tiebreaker.
I'm sure Eric would love to get to 6 if Shuhei loses, though.
Exactly. Yeah, your match could matter for the 4 people get to 6 and 3, and therefore the 5 and 4s miss the playoffs. Your match would matter for that one.
Well, we've got more vintage than you can shake a stick at.
It's going to be could be a lot of vintage. All right, so trying to get the first match set up, but we can't seem to find Rich Shea. Interesting. It's supposed to be Rich playing against it's Brian Kelly, but Brian has Ryan Eberhardt tagging in for him. Don't know where Rich is though. He was around earlier. All right, I think what we're going to do is we're going to go to ads real quick, and we're just going to skip to match number 2, which is my match against Kai. So, nice chatting with you, Steve, but apparently I got to go play.
Good luck.
We'll be right back with round 1 right after this.